Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akeridoluale. The headlines. The United States accuses Russia of violating key nuclear arms control agreement. Poland hopes to get Leopard tanks training down to 5 weeks. Plus, NATO and Japan pledge to strengthen ties amidst threats to international rule-based order. A State Department spokesperson has said Russia is violating a key nuclear arms control agreement with the United States and continues to refuse to allow inspections of its nuclear facilities. The spokesperson said in a statement that Russia is not complying with its obligations under the New START Treaty to facilitate inspection activities on its territory. Russia's refusal to facilitate inspection activities prevents the United States from exercising important rights under the treaty and threatens the viability of U.S.-Russian nuclear arms control. The statement adds that Russia has also failed to comply with the New START Treaty obligation to convene a session of the Bilateral Consultative Commission in accordance with the treaty-mandated timeline. The U.S. announcement is likely to increase tensions with relations between the two countries in the doldrums as Moscow continues its war in Ukraine. And Ukraine's prime minister has announced that a summit with the European Union will take place in Kiev on Friday and would send, quote, a powerful signal to Moscow and the world almost a year after Russia launched its invasion. Speaking at a government meeting, Denis Shmyhal said the Ukraine-EU summit will be held in Kiev on February the 3rd, calling the event extremely important for Kiev's bid to join the European bloc, adding that the fact that this summit will be held in Kiev is a powerful signal to both partners and enemies. Mr. Shmyhal also said another key event will take place on Thursday, that is consultations between Ukraine's government and the European Commission for the first time in its history. And Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov has said that a decision by France this month to provide Kiev with light AMX-10 RC armored combat vehicles had a snowball effect, with other allies promising later to send tanks. The defense minister made his comments in Paris after talks with French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu amid a debate among Kiev's allies over whether to provide fighter jets for its war against Russia after U.S. President Joe Biden ruled out giving F-16s. Mr. Lecornu said, quote, training Ukrainian pilots to fly fighter jets was part of our discussions, but no decision has yet been taken on that issue. Meanwhile, the French defense minister has said France will send 12 additional Caesar howitzers to Ukraine. Mr. Lecornu reiterated France's position when it came to supplying arms to Ukraine, saying it should not weaken France's own defense capacity, but that it should be useful to help Ukraine in the conflict with Russia, and that the weapons should be used only by Ukraine to defend itself.
In preparation for this meeting, and after covering it this morning with the French president, I can announce that our aid fund will allow us to give Ukraine 12 additional Caesar cannons. Our military doctrine is clear. There is no taboo on plane deliveries to Ukraine. And so the minister came with part of his general staff to detail the needs of the Ukrainian military, of which aviation is a part. As for training of Ukrainian pilots, this was a part of our meeting and is part of our global analysis.
We discussed the possible model of aircraft or fighter jet as a platform. We didn't discuss the name or the brand. We discussed the platform because it's our necessity to make stronger our capabilities to defend our airspace.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is working on the situation in all major operational areas and already responding to Russia's preparations for, quote, revenge attempts. Speaking during his nightly address, despite weeks of intense trench warfare, Mr. Zelensky said that both sides are compared to a meat grinder. Front lines in eastern Ukraine had largely been frozen in place since November after Kiev recaptured swaths of territory in the second half of 2022.
Today, as in fact every day, I held several meetings with the military and the head of intelligence. We are thoroughly working on the situation in all major operational areas and in perspective, what the occupier is preparing for, and how we are already responding to Russia's preparations for revenge attempts. Our defense and security forces, the Ukrainian government, our partners, we are all working together to ensure that Russia not only fails to win back on the battlefield, but that the occupier loses its attempt for revenge, the last hope for aggression. Russia's defeat will prevent any alternatives to lasting and reliable peace.
And it takes a 2-month regular course in Leopard Tanks Training Center in Western Poland to have soldiers ready to join the crew at the combat battalion. That's according to Polish officers at the Howitzers Training Center. The training center, which is in the village of the same name, close to the German border, is equipped with simulators and staffed with professional instructors that can train 14 crews of 4 at once. The soldiers can practice for different roles and on 3 different models of the tanks that are available in the center. According to Polish officers, depending on the role, most of the courses take up to 8 to 10 weeks, with 3 to 6 months needed for the armament mechanics. Earlier, Polish officers at the same training camp in Poland, which might soon be one of the places where Ukrainian soldiers will learn to operate Leopard 2 tanks, said they can train a tank's crew in just 5 weeks if needed. A coalition of countries led by Poland was formed in January to provide Ukraine with Leopard 2 battle tanks. And on January the 20th, Ukraine's defense minister Oleksiy Reznikov said that Ukrainian forces will train on the Leopard 2 tanks in Poland.
At the moment, we run 5 courses at Leopard Training Center. One of the courses is for the tank crews, so for the gunner, loader and commander. The second course is for the tank drivers for Leopard 2A4, 2A5 and 2PM. Above that, we also run specialistic courses for the mechanics for the armor, the chassis and additional equipment that goes with Leopard tanks. I think it is relatively easy to move from post-Soviet equipment to the latest generation equipment. It is not such a big difference. It is only a matter of training the drivers, the gunners. The rules of firing stay the same on this tank as on the others. When we talk about training the post-Soviet tanks to work with tanks like Leopards or Abrams, 10 weeks of training is sufficient. If we intensify the training at the expense of instructors' time and at the expense of our weekends, we're able to train a crew that comes from the post-Soviet equipment in 5 weeks so they can work on the new generation equipment.
Former U.S. Navy SEAL Daniel Swift, who was killed fighting for Ukraine, was commemorated in a memorial service in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv yesterday. Its mayor, Andriy Sadovye, who attended the service, said that Swift fought for Ukraine's International Legion and earned an award during his service. According to a statement by the U.S. Navy, Mr. Swift deserted the U.S. military in 2019 and was killed while fighting in Ukraine on January the 18th. The service in a Catholic church in Lviv's historic center was attended by several dozen mourners, including Mr. Swift's brother, Thomas. And former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has met Republican legislators pressing the United States to sustain aid to Ukraine to help it fight off Russia's assault. Mr. Johnson spoke with U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy, the top Republican in his office, and is scheduled to speak at a private Republican club this evening. Mr. Johnson is expected to discuss the need for Western unity and support for Ukraine and what more can be done against the threat Russia poses at the Atlantic Council think tank. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden says he will discuss Ukraine's latest requests for advanced weaponry with its President Volodymyr Zelensky. Last week, the U.S., Germany, and the U.K. agreed to send battle tanks to Ukraine, as both Kiev and Russia are believed to be preparing for major offensives. Now, Ukraine is pressing its allies for fighter jets and long-range missiles that could hit Russian targets far behind the front lines. And the current British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says, quote, a prolonged stalemate in Moscow's conflict with Ukraine would only benefit Russia. According to a cabinet meeting readout, Mr. Sunak said he reached this conclusion after reviewing the UK's approach to the conflict since becoming Prime Minister in October of last year, adding that this led him to decide that there was an opportunity to accelerate British support for Ukraine. Mr. Sunak said this would give Kiev the best chance of success and make the most of the window of opportunity where Russian forces are on the back foot. The Prime Minister added that this new UK strategy to accelerate support would include greater diplomatic efforts and planning for how to rebuild after the conflict. And a former Wagner Group member seeking asylum in Norway has apologized to Ukrainians living in the Scandinavian country who object to his presence there. Andrei Medvedev said in an interview, quote, I'm a scoundrel to you, but I only ask you to take into account that I have come to realize that, albeit belatedly, and I spoke against all. I ask you not to condemn me, and in any case, I apologize. Mr. Medvedev, who said he fears for his life if he returns to Russia, lives in a center for asylum seekers in Oslo. And Serhiy Sheravatsi, spokesperson for the eastern grouping of the Ukrainian armed forces, said the key eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut continues to be one of the main directions for Russian attacks, and everything is being done to prevent Russian forces from blocking the movement of Ukrainian units. Speaking during an interview on Ukrainian television, Mr. Sheravatsi said, quote, Bakhmut continues to be one of the main directions of the enemy's attack. They've hit our positions there with cannons and rocket artillery 197 times, and there were 42 combat encounters. Adding that the enemy got significant losses in personnel during the last 24 hours. 277 enemies were killed, 258 were injured to varying degrees. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida pledged to strengthen ties, saying Beijing and Moscow are leading an authoritarian pushback against the international rule-based order. Mr. Stoltenberg said that the war in Ukraine matters for all of us, and therefore we're also very grateful for the support that Japan is providing, also using planes and cargo capabilities. Japan has provided non-lethal aid to Ukraine in the form of drones, bulletproof vests, helmets, tents, and medical supplies. Mr. Stoltenberg arrived in Tokyo on Monday from South Korea, where he had urged Seoul to increase its military support for Ukraine. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to the program. Oleksiy Haran is professor of comparative politics at the Kiev-Mohyla University, and he joins us virtually on the program now from Kiev, the Ukrainian capital. Good morning to you, Professor Haran. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm always saying many thanks to your program for coverage of what's going on in Ukraine and for very realistic coverage.
Thank you very much.
That's important.
Sorry, please go on.
Spreading truth about what's going on in Ukraine is very important, given Russian misinformation campaign. So thanks again.
Thank you. Let's look at what has happened currently before we go back. When last I spoke to you, there was conversation and there were some level of disagreements about what to give Ukraine by its allies, whether to go ahead with the tanks and all of that, and how much of it. But that seems to have been resolved in favor of giving those tanks, Leopard 2 tanks, Abrams tanks, Challenger tanks, and all of that. But now Ukraine is asking for fighter jets, and the U.S. has said no, it will not do so. But there are those who are pointing out that, well, they said they wouldn't do so about the tanks, now they've done so. So are you believing that it's quite possible that all those who have said no right now will probably still acquiesce and give you the tanks, rather the jets.
We Ukrainians hope for that. Look, we were asking for air defense systems, tanks and fighters a year ago. When Russians started to bombard the whole Ukraine, we needed weapons for protection. Air defense systems are coming now, a year after Russian invasion, full-scale invasion. There was debate about tanks. Now, finally, there is a decision to supply tanks. But as far as I understand, the first tanks, Western tanks, will appear in Ukraine in 3 months or so. So it's very belated, but nevertheless, better late than never. So the same is about fire jets. Fighters. So we hope there would be a wise decision. We are bleeding. We are bleeding for the whole year. We need these weapons to defend ourselves. So we hope that international community will provide us with necessary weapons. By the way, not only the West, because there was decision of Morocco to resupply to Ukraine Soviet-type tanks, which Morocco has. So there was a decision, to resupply it to Ukraine, and so we are thankful for that. Again, help counts.
Let me ask you about the fears that even as we watch these various types of weapons and aircraft. Let me ask you about the fear of those who are making the supplies. They say that what they have undertaken is to help ensure that Ukraine is able to defend itself and not be able to go on the offensive against Russia. Now, that is a thin line, and many of these weapons are coming from countries that don't have too many of them themselves. So you heard the French defense minister there saying that, look, we have to give these weapons, but then we also have to retain our own capacity to defend ourselves in any case. So are you not seeing that perhaps there's a thin line to walk here by many of these countries between giving you what you say you want and you need, and the fact that that will bring them into direct conflict with Russia, apart from putting them in a weak position to defend themselves?
Well, we had the lessons of World War II. We know that Western democracies decided not to, they were too afraid of Hitler, and they decided not to provoke him to be involved in negotiations, to make appeasement policy. And what happened? Hitler attacked. So look, what's happening with the Russian policy? The West didn't respond strongly when Russia attacked Georgia, when Russia bombarded Aleppo, killing lots of civilians in Syria, when Russia seized Crimea, then Russia seized part of the Donbass. So if Putin is not stopped, he will continue. So it's necessary to stop him. Well, it's up for international community to decide what to do, but I hope there are lessons of history and that international community would be wise enough. And again, the sooner the better. Putin understands only the logic of force. If you do not supply us weapons, then more Ukrainian civilians would die. By the way, when you are talking about offensives, that somebody is afraid of Ukrainian offensive, look, we are not going to cross the border with Russia. We are not interested in fighting on Russian territory. All we want is to liberate our Ukrainian territories. That's all we need. And that's our aim.
You mentioned the lessons of history. So let's take a look at some of the history here. And I did promise the last time that you were on the program that next time that you're on the program, we would take a slightly more detailed look at the history. So here we are to look at that.
I'm happy that you are keeping your promises. That's very good.
Indeed. And I want us to look at the historical background to all of this. When some of the countries that were part of the former Soviet Union, when they left, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, and those countries moved into the Western orbit, some of them joined the EU, some joined NATO, the Russians objected, but they weren't prepared to go to war on it. On those moves. I mean, the likes of Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, all those countries that were formerly in the Soviet bloc, all moved into the Western orbit, and there wasn't war at that point. But now Ukraine. Perhaps you could give an idea of why Ukraine is so important to Russia that it is prepared to go to war to prevent Ukraine from moving into the Western influence or the Western orbit?
This is a question to Kremlin and to Mr. Putin, what's going on in his head. But look, just compare the size and strategic importance of Ukraine and of the Baltic countries. So Ukraine was the second largest republic in the Soviet Union with huge potential. So once Mr. Brzezinski, he said, if Russia without Ukraine cannot be again an empire and a threat to the world, Russia with Ukraine will become again colonial empire and will threaten the world. So, yeah, if Putin doesn't control Ukraine, you know, his plans to restore the Soviet Union or to restore the former Russian Empire, they are not very realistic, frankly speaking. But if he controls Ukraine, then he would have the possibility to continue his offensive to Europe. There is also history, and history, we know history is always complicated. You know, Russian President Putin, he declines the very existence of Ukrainians as a separate nation. He is saying that Ukrainians and Russians, they are one people. So that's why we want to restore the unity of great Russia. In saying that, he's coming actually to the ideology of the Russian Empire. In the Russian Empire, Ukrainians were not recognized as a separate nation, and we were called, this is direct translation into English, Little Russians. So there were no name Ukrainians in the Russian Empire. They called us in Russian, it's Malorossi. Direct translation is Little Russians. So I'm not Ukrainian, I'm just Little Russian. You know, this is the ideology of the empire. And the paradox is that Kiev, the center of Christianity for the whole Eastern Europe, including Russia, was created at least 700 years before Moscow, when Kiev was a prosperous capital of one of the largest states in medieval Europe. It was called Kiev State. On the territory of Moscow, there were swamps. Okay, but then the situation, you know, history is complicated. There was Mongol Tatar invasion, the whole, you know, strategic situation changed. So Moscow emerged as a center, and at some point, Moscow Kingdom, you know, seized Ukraine, and then they called us Little Russians. So, and you know, the belief, traditional belief for Russians is that Ukrainians are lower, they do not differ from Russians. So this is not only in Putin's mind, this is in the mind of common Russians. This is direct heritage of the Russian Empire and then of the Soviet Union. Under the Soviet Union, formally, you know, we were recognized as Ukrainians, we had the rights, but it was formal. In reality, if, for example, if I'm a student and I put Ukrainian national costume on the birthday of our great poet Shevchenko, not a football player Shevchenko, who is known by the whole world, but our great poet and founder of Ukrainian literature. So if you appear at his monument, which is right in front of Ukrainian main university, in Ukrainian vyshivanka, national embroidery, guess what would happen to this student? He would be accused of nationalism and he would be excluded from the university. So this was the reality of the Soviet time. So now again, Putin is coming back to this imperial ideology, and that's why it's very important for him to seize the capital of Ukraine, to seize the whole country, and as he is saying, to reunite the Russian people. Look, who, again, if we're talking about the lessons of history, who was dreaming about reunification of the German nation? Who said we are going to unify all the Germans who are living in Europe in the Third Reich? It was
Hitler.
So basically, if you compare the languages, the narrative, it's the same. That's why it's so dangerous. And I would like to explain you again. For example, yes, there are Russians who are living in Ukraine. I am half Ukrainian and half Russian. My native language was Russian language. And with my mom, I'm still communicating in Russian language. So, you know, people are freely speaking Russian language in Kiev. But the problem for Putin, if he hear, oh, some people are speaking in Russian language, so they would like to join Russia. No. Look, we have political nation, and Russians who are living in Ukraine, they are fine. They consider Ukraine as their motherland. Russian speakers, you know, they consider Ukraine as their motherland, and they are fighting now for Ukraine. So if you analyze, well, sometimes I'm asked by my friends, look, what is the language which is spoken in the Ukrainian army? And they are surprised to hear that I'm saying, you know, it doesn't matter. Soldiers and officers, they are talking in Ukrainian, they are talking in Russian language, but that doesn't matter at all. You know, they are united to defend Ukraine as their motherland. They do not want to be part of Russia. And that's what Putin and many Russians, unfortunately, they do not understand it. So, yeah, that's important to understand. And I think you in Africa, you can understand that you have different ethnic groups, but you are trying to build the national idea, integrity, which unites people of different ethnic groups. And that's what we have in Ukraine. Yes, majority are Ukrainians. Majority now is speaking Ukrainian language, but, you know, it's the language which unifies the people. And those who would like to continue to speak Russian, fine, no problem.
Yeah, because many of you, in any case, as you just pointed out, there are many people in Ukraine who are in fact Ukrainians, but they have a Russian heritage, and quite a number of them also speak Russian. So the fact that you speak Russian doesn't put you at a disadvantage in Ukraine, because there are so many other people in the same condition, right?
Again, so we had centuries of Russification. Ukrainian language was discriminated. We had centuries of Russification. My father was Russified, so I am from the family of Russified. Ukrainians. But now Ukrainians, they are discovering their roots. And many people, because of the Russian aggression, because of atrocities Russians are doing, so they are saying, no, now we would like to switch to Ukrainian language. But the basic fact is that all Ukrainians are bilingual. We know, we know Ukrainian language and we know Russian language by default, because informational space, because of history and all these things. So for us, it's not a problem to speak both languages. And well, I believe you are showing Moscow, it's not
Yes,
Ukraine.
Moscow. Yes, yes.
Yes. So, yes, with these crazy letters Z, Okay, so yes, for Ukrainians, again, as I have said, it's very common, was that one person is speaking Ukrainian language, the other is responding in Russian language. Even on TV, you may see that one is speaking Ukrainian, the other is speaking Russian language. No problem at all. We do not differentiate people. We're not asking you, who are you? Are you Ukrainian or are you ethnic Russian? In fact, we communicate, we don't know. We don't know who are you. Unfortunately, recently, I met one soldier at the front line where I was on volunteer mission. And he was speaking Russian language, and several days ago I knew he died. And only now, because I didn't even knew his real name, I knew his nickname. In the front lines you use these nicknames.
Yes.
So I didn't know even his name. And when he died, only then I discovered that actually he was Muslim. He was half Ukrainian, half Caucasian. His name is Muslim name. He was speaking Russian language and he was fighting for Ukraine. So again, this is an example of this political nation. And again, I didn't know about. We do not ask, who are you? Are you Ukrainian? Are you Russian? What is your ethnicity? We are just people, who are fighting for our freedom.
Indeed. Because of our time, I want to ask you one more question, because and this one now is not going back in history, is looking forward. All wars come to an end at one point, no matter for how long it goes on and so on. They do come to an end at some point. And therefore, that's the basis on which I want to ask my next question. Do you think that as a result of all the historical background and context that you've given, this situation in Ukraine, this invasion of Ukraine by Russia, will exacerbate regional identifications of people which were not necessarily very prominent before, now, when the conflict ends? So you have people talking about, oh yes, this man is Russian, this man is Ukrainian, and so on, and which may introduce tension into communities where previously, as you explained, there was none.
No, actually vice versa. Look, Russian invasion cemented Ukrainian political nation, because before the war, there were people, in the east and south of the country who believed, yeah, it's possible to have good relations with Russia. Maybe we should listen to what Russian propaganda is saying. And now these people, they see what Russian army is bringing to them. Putin has this idea, this is called in Russian Ruski Mir, which is directly translated as Russian world. So he's saying there is a Russian world which unites all Russian speakers, and we are coming to Ukraine to defend Russian speakers. And look, these people who lived in the east of Ukraine, for example, in the cities of Kharkiv or Mariupol, which were predominantly Russian speaking, they saw the atrocities of what Russia is bringing to them. Okay? So even for those who previously believed in this idea of Russian world, now it's totally collapsed. Just look at the videos, look at photos, what from these cities, what destruction Russian world bring to these cities. So this invasion, paradoxically or logically, you may say, but contrary to what Putin expected, it cemented Ukrainian nation. Because now even those Russian speakers who believed that, yeah, it's possible to deal with Russia, to have some compromises, now they're saying, no, we need to be defended from Russia and from the so-called Russian world. So again, the trend is that there is less regionalization within Ukraine. There is a process, again, as I have said, many people who are speaking predominantly Russian language, they are trying now to switch to Ukrainian because they would like to, not because of pressure, because now they feel more Ukrainian. In future Ukraine, there would be, some people will remain Russian speakers, fine, no problem. We lived before that and we will live before that. But it would be independent Ukraine and without Russian pressure and without Russian invaders.
Indeed. Indeed. Professor Oleksiy Haran, thank you so very much for your time and for the detailed analysis, the historical context and background. Many of our viewers will be very much more enlightened about the background, what's going on in Ukraine and how all of this is expected to pan out. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you again. And if you would like, or your viewers would like to hear more, please invite me. I'm always ready to share information because we understand that Ukraine doesn't have so many resources like Russia to put in the propaganda campaign, but we have truth on our side, and I'm happy to share information with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Haran. Thank you for your time, and good luck. The United Kingdom has trumpeted new legislation requiring property ownership disclosures aimed at cracking down on Russian oligarchs and corrupt elites laundering illicit wealth. Foreign companies holding UK property had until the end of Tuesday, that was yesterday, to identify their beneficial owners in a new public register, making the UK one of the first countries to mandate this disclosure. Only 4 Russian nationals appeared on the register as of yesterday morning, and those were Vladimir Putin, one of Russia's wealthiest businessmen, Russia's former Deputy Prime Minister Igor Shuvalov and his wife, and Alexander Frolov, the former Chief Executive Officer of Evraz, a Russian steel and mining company. Absent from the register were some sanctioned Russians who have been linked to UK properties, including the billionaire businessman and former Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Laddie Williams is here.
Morning.
And anytime I see Laddie, we're going to talk money.
Yeah, money.
And what brings it and what takes it away. So
exactly. And Happy New Month.
Happy New Month to you.
Yeah, Happy New Month.
It was a tough January, but we got through it.
Yeah.
And we weren't even in Russia or Ukraine.
Exactly. So. We got through and we're still,
we're
holding
still trying
on
to get through.
Because getting here this morning wasn't easiest.
No. That was a lot of what was going on in January.
Yeah.
And it's still going on.
It's still going on.
Iran and Russia moved towards linking their banking systems. Well, this would be logical, considering what we've been reporting.
Exactly. Yeah. Both pariah states at this time. And obviously we've seen how they've struggled to, get their international settlements, going with being exempted from the SWIFT network. That's most of their banks from Russia and Iranian banks. So I think Iran was cut out from 2018, and up till now. So they're not able to. They're still off, and Russia has joined, So it makes sense, for both of them, since they are major trading partners, to look for ways, to make their international payments away from SWIFT. So that's what they're doing now. They're looking at using Russia's messaging system. You know,
Right.
that's been up for a while now.
That was the one created in the aftermath of the sanctions.
The sanctions. So they're going to see how they can use, you know, that platform to make their settlements. We see how that's impacted, you know, how Russia pays, you know, for their bonds. You know, they're not able to
pay in dollars. They insist that people should collect the money in rubles.
And, you know, that's still, you know, working out fine, you know, for now. But at the end of the day, they need to look for, you know, other means to make those payments, and so they don't enter default, you know, going forward. So we're seeing them push this whole deal with Iran. It's looking like it's going to happen, you know, this year. We're seeing the central bank officials from Russia. They're going to visit Iran, and they're going to be looking at how to, you know, solidify, you know, that partnership so that they can start making their payments. You know, Russia's been, you know, looking at using crypto, you know, for a while now. But at the end of the day, they don't want their citizens to use crypto for transactions. They want just them to be able to,
as government.
As government, you know, we can use it, but you don't touch it.
Not at this point.
So that's what they're looking at this point. It looks like it's moving really fast.
The Eurozone economy grew in Q4 of last year.
Yeah,
it's unexpected.
Quite unexpected. Why? Because if we remember the start of 2022, you know, when the war started, once Russia turned off the taps, you know, to Europe, that's for gas.
They went into panic mode.
Exactly, and we saw the forecast then. It's, Eurozone is going to go into a recession. It's confirmed. It's concrete. There's no way they can survive it. And here we are, and they did survive it, and it's they were able to eke out a growth for Q4 in 2022, which is obviously expected, because even though it's unexpected, it's expected because we saw everything.
What had happened, everything that was going to lead to the recession.
Exactly, started to ease, and we've seen, you know, natural gas prices, that's eased a whole lot from the highs of about $10. It's back down below even pre-war levels.
That was it. Even before the invasion happened.
So that has helped them, and obviously winter not being as cold as expected too, that has also, you know, helped them eke out this gain, and inflation also easing. And the central bank, obviously, they went, you know, hard on inflation in 2022, raising rates, you know, just even though they were late, you know, compared to the Fed.
They came to the party a bit late.
Quite late, but they were able to still, you know, do it. And it's 2023. Expectations are still high because all those things that were high in 2022 have come down, but hopefully the war doesn't escalate, you know, more than what
all of a sudden, and then you now have...
Exactly. So the forecast is still looking quite good, you know, for 2023. Hopefully things stay as they are or even get better, you know, with the war, and, you know, inflation continues the downward trend, you know, energy prices, you know, stay on that downward trend. We can, you know, see good gains for the first quarter of 2023.
How are the markets looking?
Well,
it's midweek.
January was good for risk assets. You know, we saw how risk...
after a very long run of bad.
Exactly. In 2022, risk assets suffered. Whatever you bought in the markets before February, you are definitely, you know, in loss. But come January, we're seeing these markets, you know, looking really good. Crypto, that rebounded from about $16,500 to about $23,000 for Bitcoin. We've seen the NASDAQ, that's recovered most of the losses too. So it seemed like 2022 was the year for, you know, safe assets. We saw the US dollar, that rallied to, you know, new highs. But it's looking like, you know, even though it's early days, maybe 2023 might be the year for risk.
And it might be better than 2022.
It might be better, but at the end of the day, you know, there's still caution there. Everyone's looking out for the Fed. They're going to make that decision today on the rates. Everyone is expecting 25 basis points. That's been priced in. But what investors are looking out for is what the Fed is going to say about future rate hikes.
That was what I was going to say. But thanks, Ladi, as always. More of this analysis and more of the business news will be coming up right after this show. Ladi and the gang will be available there. Thanks, Ladi. Now, Russia says it will welcome moves by the International Olympic Committee to allow its athletes to compete in the Olympics after the world's top sports body looked at options for their return to international events. Stanislav Postianakov, head of Russia's Olympic Committee, said, quote, certainly there is some attempt by the IOC to allow our athletes to participate in international competitions, maybe in the future Olympic Games as well. Of course, we welcome it entirely. Last week, the IOC said the Olympic Council of Asia had offered Russian and Belarusian athletes the chance to compete in Asia during an outcry from Kiev, which has called for Russian sports people to be banned over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And from NATO's Secretary General to the Ukrainian president, the war in Ukraine dominates the publicly known names submitted by Tuesday's deadline for the 2023 Nobel Peace Prize. The list of nominees submitted to the committee is kept secret for at least 50 years, in line with Nobel statutes. But those eligible to nominate people, including former laureates, lawmakers, and cabinet ministers from any country in the world, and some university professors, are free to reveal the name of the person or organization they have proposed. Lawmaker Christian Tybring-Gjedde from Norway's Populist Progress Party hinted social media shortly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th that he would nominate Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. There are a whole load of other names on that list. Finally on the program, Tony the gorilla, remember him? Hates the cold, and it's a constant challenge for his keepers at Kiev Zoo to keep him warm and comfortable in the face of hour-long power cuts every day caused by the war. Russia has been bombarding Ukraine's power grid and heating infrastructure in recent months, and although it has so far proven a relatively mild winter, temperatures of around 0 Celsius in the day and minus 10 Celsius at night are way too cold for Tony and other zoo animals from tropical countries. But the zoo has made it a priority to keep Tony warm despite the outages by setting up a wood fire oven in the private session. Valentina Dikharova, primate specialist at Kiev Zoo, says primates become less active and stop eating when there's no light. But as a temporary solution, they have installed battery-powered lights. However, help is also now at hand from Germany, where a team at the Berlin Zoo has managed to raise 400,000 euros in contributions from well-wishers to pay for generators and other items. Good luck to Tony. Thanks for being with us. That's our program this morning. My name is Ladi Akere-Doluale. Do have a pleasant midweek day ahead. Good morning.